Okay, let's dive in. We're talking about something I think many of our listeners grapple with. If you're someone aiming high, maybe leading a team, training hard, pushing limits in your career, you know that pressure. You're chasing excellence, but there's always this tension, right? How do you keep striving without hitting the wall, burning out, or even worse, getting in your own head and messing things up?
That's the tightrope walk for almost every high performer, isn't it? And for this deep dive, we're really leaning into the insights from Coach Ed Padalecki's writing. He spends a lot of time in these high-stakes performance worlds,
He does.
and he brings a really clear perspective to this exact problem.
Absolutely. Coach Padalecki really cuts right to the core of what separates someone who burns bright and then just crashes from someone who actually sustains that excellence. So our mission today is to unpack his perspective.
Which draws heavily on Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar's work.
Right. And make it really practical for you listening, whether you're in business, coaching, or an athlete yourself.
And the fundamental idea here, the big distinction Coach Padalecki pulls from Dr. Ben-Shahar's research, it's this difference between perfectionism and optimal. And this isn't just playing with words, getting this tip. Well, it's the pivot point. It's what helps you break through those tough spots instead of just breaking down.
Okay, perfectionism versus optimalism. Let's break that down. Coach Padalecki, using that framework from Dr. Ben-Shahar, really draws a sharp line. So tell us about the perfectionist. What does that look like?
So the perfectionist, in this view, is really defined by this intense focus on the outcome, maybe even a rigid focus.
Okay.
They're not just aiming for good, they need flawless. And it's not just in one place. They expect this perfect performance across the board, work, family, health, relationships, all at the same time.
Wow, so juggling everything perfectly, always, like never dropping a ball.
Exactly. And the huge flaw here, as Coach Padalecki highlights, is that the perfectionist basically ignores reality, the messy stuff. The fact that priorities actually shift sometimes. They just disregard those real-world constraints.
That sounds exhausting and just not sustainable.
It really is. Performance psychology calls this cognitive inflexibility. It's a rigid way of thinking. Struggles hard when things don't go perfectly to plan or when, life happens.
And what's the result when you operate like that, chasing this impossible ideal everywhere?
Well, the consequences are pretty harsh. And ironically, it often leads away from high performance. You see burnout, loads of anxiety, chronic stress, and often, believe it or not, underperformance, because that pressure to be flawless just paralyzes you. And there's this constant replaying of perceived failures, rumination. It leads to this draining feeling that you're just never quite good enough no matter what you actually achieve. It's a tough cycle, striving and suffering.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of that trap. So let's flip it. What about the optimalists? How do Coach Padalecki and Dr. Ben-Shahar describe this other path?
The optimalist comes from a totally different starting point. Their focus. It's not the flawless outcome, it's the process. They're still absolutely dedicated to excellence, but, and this is key, they do it while embracing reality.
Embracing reality. That sounds like the direct opposite of the perfectionist ignoring it.
It is, exactly. Optimalists are good at setting clear priorities. They get that going hard in one area often means, making trade-offs somewhere else. They don't try to win everywhere all at once. They consciously pick where to focus their best energy right now.
So it's more about smart energy allocation based on what truly matters, not just sprinting everywhere.
Precisely. And the strategic way of thinking is directly linked to psychological flexibility. That's the ability to stay present, to adapt your thoughts, your actions when things get tough,
Right.
and to keep doing things that align with your values even when it's difficult. It's really a cornerstone of resilience, mental toughness, that long-term peak performance.
And there's a great quote from Coach Padalecki you mentioned that really captures this.
He says, optimal doesn't mean perfect. It means the best possible within your current reality.
The best possible within your current reality. Wow. There's a lot packed into that. It keeps the high ambition, but grounds it in, real life, practical limits.
It really does. And what's interesting is how optimalists use constraints. They don't just resent them as barriers. They actually see them as sources of clarity.
How can limits give you clarity? That feels a bit backward for someone aiming high.
Because they force you to choose, prioritize. Optimalists use what Coach P calls seasonality, understanding what needs the main focus in this particular season or phase.
Prevents spreading yourself too thin.
Exactly. And they also deliberately build in recovery, margin, time to rest, space for surprises. They get that this isn't optional. It's crucial infrastructure for performing long-term.
And they can handle bumps in the road. Imperfection doesn't completely throw them off track.
Absolutely. They accept imperfection as just part of striving, but, and this is important, without lowering their actual standards for excellence. They know not every single attempt, every meeting, every day will be perfect. And that's okay. That's why they tend to thrive over the long haul, avoiding that toxic cycle that comes from impossible expectations.
That's a really useful distinction. It's not about aiming lower, it's about aiming smarter with more adaptability. Which brings us to this idea of a mental reset, focusing on progress over perfection.
Right. Coach Padalecki really stresses this. If you look at the truly elite performers, Olympians, top CEOs, they're not flawless, not at all. What sets them apart is how quickly they recover from the stumbles, from the mistakes, the imperfect moments.
Yeah, that fits with Dr. Ben-Shahar's point that Coach P highlights. The question isn't whether you'll fall short, it's how quickly you'll recover.
That shift in focus changes everything. It takes the energy away from beating yourself up about the slip-up and puts it into the powerful act of getting back on course.
Right.
So instead of getting stuck ruminating, like the perfectionist, the optimalist kind of instinctively asks different questions.
What are those questions? What's that internal compass for the optimalist look like?
Well, when things go sideways or they hit a rough patch, they ask things like, okay, what's the next best step I can take right now?
Grounded, actionable.
Exactly. And grounded in reality, they ask, how can I perform at my best given today's constraints? Maybe they're tired, maybe short on time. And to keep moving forward, that question, what's the 1% improvement I can make today?
Those questions immediately shift your focus away from the past mistake towards what you can actually do now.
It's a really powerful way to keep momentum, keep morale up. And Coach Padalecki turns this into something super practical. He calls it your 1% better challenge today.
Okay, let's dive into that challenge. How can someone listening apply this, like, right now?
Coach P gives a simple 3-step process. First step, self-check. Just take a moment. Look at an area of your life, work, parenting, health, maybe relationships, somewhere you suspect you might be holding yourself to those unrealistic perfectionist standards. Where's that pressure coming from?
So find the potential perfectionism hot zone.
Got it. Second step, reframe. For that area you just identified, picture what optimalism would look like there. What does excellent within my current reality for this specific thing today actually mean? What would progress look like instead of some perfect outcome?
So you're consciously redefining success for that context, given today's reality.
Exactly. And third step, action. Now choose just one area, maybe the one from your self-check, and commit to making a single shift.
Right.
From outcome focus to process focus, just for today.
Just one shift, one day. That makes it feel much less daunting.
That's the whole point. And for that area today, define your floor and your ceiling. Your floor is like the minimum viable effort, the absolute baseline process action you will take. Your ceiling is the stretch goal. What awesome execution of the process might look like today.
Like Coach P's example, the floor could be a 20-minute strategy block, no distractions.
Right. Minimum acceptable process.
And the ceiling might be finish the whole pitch deck and review it with the team.
Exactly. You define both.
Yeah.
Then your focus is just on executing the process, hitting that floor, maybe aiming for the ceiling. But the real win, the thing you actually celebrate, it's doing the process. Celebrate executing that focused work block because that's the repeatable behavior. That's what builds progress over time, regardless of whether the final outcome was perfect today.
Celebrating the process, the effort you can control within the messy reality, that feels like a fundamental shift in where you get your sense of accomplishment.
It absolutely is. And this brings us right back to the core of what Coach Padalecki calls the champion's mindset.
What does that champion's mindset look like day to day?
It's really understanding that the best performers, they aren't defined by never messing up or always getting perfect results. They're defined by being they internalize that the real goal isn't some static, impossible, perfect. The goal is the ongoing pursuit of progress.
Progress, not perfect. That's really the takeaway here.
It is. And they develop this wisdom, this flexibility to know when it's time to push harder and when they need to adjust. Pivot this strategy, maybe tweak expectations based on what's actually happening. This adaptability, this commitment to process and progress, that's the bedrock of sustainable excellence. Doesn't matter if it's sports, business, or family life.
So wrapping this up, the big takeaway from our deep dive into Coach Padalecki's insights, building on Dr. Ben-Shahar, is really the huge power in consciously choosing optimalism over perfectionism.
It's about taking all that drive, all that ambition, and channeling it, not into something rigid and fragile, but into a system that's flexible, resilient, one that lets you perform at your best consistently over the long haul, and, crucially, lets you thrive while you're doing it.
And Coach Padalecki's call to action is so simple, so clear. Let's just get 1% better today.
Start there. One small shift, focus on that process, build from that.
This framework gives you the tools to start doing that right away. So as you go about your day, navigating all those demands, maybe just pause and ask yourself this. How can you bring together your really high standards and that necessary dose of self-kindness in how you pursue excellence, starting now? Understanding that for the optimalist, those two things aren't fighting each other.
No, they work together.
They're actually partners in sustainable success.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We hope this gives you some food for thought as you continue on your journey.